Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of Toolbox Talks on the Sideshed podcast. My name is Matt Jones, and today we are tackling an issue which we haven't yet covered before. We're talking about internet law. So it's a really interesting conversation, actually, and in the wake of a lot of the stuff that we saw last year in relation to the GDPR, which was the General Data Protection Regulation scheme that rolled out in Europe, and a number of other things that have been kicking off recently, including the California Privacy Act, a lot of the copywriting laws coming out both in Europe, around the world. This is a very relevant conversation, and I know a lot of you guys out there are certainly wanting to know how you can, I suppose, keep a tab and make sure that you're doing the right thing in relation to your website and how you can, I suppose, effectively not get in trouble. And Richard does leave us with some good tips there on how we can do that. Obviously, a lot of these laws are designed to target the larger organisations. However, it is a matter of time probably before these laws do hit your shores wherever you are in the world. So it is worth noting. A lot of it does sound kind of like common sense. However, the thing about common sense is it's not really that common. So anyway, I hope you enjoy this podcast. I certainly did enjoy recording it. And I know that if you guys, if you did want to have any questions or if you wanted anything answered specifically, you can ask them in the show notes and we'll get them answered for you. Or likewise, if Richard said, if you guys have any questions that you wanted any clarification on or anything followed up any further, by all means, you can ask those and we'll get him back on the show to answer them for you. So enjoy this podcast. I know you will. And if you do enjoy it, please do us a favor. Go share it with somebody who you think may enjoy it. And also, if you'd like to leave us a review, that would be much appreciated. You can do that at iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, YouTube, Facebook, Google+, anywhere like that. So we'd much appreciate that. Okay, that's all. Bye. Today's podcast has been proudly brought to you by Tradie Web Guys. Tradie Web Guys work with tradespeople only on their websites and marketing solutions to help them stand out from their competition. Everything from web design through to SEO, search engine marketing, content creation, you name it, guys. It is a customized solution for trade-based organizations, and it's fantastic. Head across to tradiewebguys.com.au/apply, fill in the form, and let's have a conversation. It'll be the best thing you could possibly do to kickstart 2019 the right way.
Giving tradies and contractors around the globe the tools to run a modern business. You're listening to Toolbox Talks from the Sideshed. Now here's your host, Matt Jones.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to Toolbox Talks on the Sideshed podcast. I am Matt Jones, your host, and I'm joined today by Richard Chapo from SoCalInternetLawyer.com. Richard, welcome.
Thank you for having me on.
Now, where are you from, Richard?
I'm located in San Diego, California.
Oh,
USA.
I love San Diego.
Yes, it's a horrible place to live.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Constant sunshine.
It's pretty. It's not dissimilar actually to Sydney, to be honest.
Actually, my stepbrother went down and lived in Sydney for a year and said the same thing. He really enjoyed it down there.
Yeah, I've got some fond memories which I can tell you about offline. It's one of those experiences.
Those are always the best. You know? Yeah. We're also close to Tijuana, the happiest place on earth. So
right,
there's always that.
I could happily not go back to Tijuana, but San Diego is definitely on my hit list again.
Yeah, it's a good place. I've been fortunate enough to be here for 30 or 40 years. So
are you a Padre?
It's difficult being a Padre, but eventually, supposedly, one of these years, we're going to have an actual winning team. So yeah, I'm actually more of a hockey fan, believe it or not.
Really?
Yeah, which is strange growing up in San Diego, but got into it early, and so I yell at the Los Angeles Kings when they're playing.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, my wife's Canadian, so I know too well the hockey experience. I love it.
Oh, yes. There's a good 3 hours a night during May and June when they're just screaming and yelling at the television.
Nice one. So, mate, you're joining us on the show today because we are talking about internet law. Now, this is something we haven't really covered on before the Sideshed, and I know, like our thing specifically, I run a digital agency. We do websites and marketing, all that kind of stuff, and so my clients are used to me beating them around the ears with, internet-related content, but we never really covered the legal side of things, so I'm pretty interested to have this conversation with you, and I'm hoping we can address a few of the current issues and maybe some of the things that might relate to our listeners out there, wherever they are, dotted all over this planet? Because there has been a lot of changes recently, hasn't there? I mean, I know, as we mentioned offline, there's this whole GDPR thing that went on in Europe. And my question with that was, I suppose not a question, but I feel like that's kind of paving the way for a lot of things that are going to be rolled out in different markets around the world. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's certainly was kind of the major question. A lot of people were in the same boat, and myself as well. Was would this be something that would just be isolated in Europe, or would it be something that would spread? And my thought was, I'm based in the U.S. My thought was that it would not spread to the U.S. And literally 3 months later, it's already here in California. They've enacted a law that's very similar to the GDPR. So it does look like it's spreading. How far it goes, it's hard to say. One of the things that you see with it that a lot of people, myself included, didn't really think about originally is that so many of the businesses now that are online, particularly in the infrastructure side of it, they're all over the world. So if they're going to comply with the GDPR because they have clients or whatever in the European Union, for them, it's just cheaper to make all of their systems GDPR compliant.
Right.
And then they require vendors, wherever you may be. If you're a vendor in New Zealand, then you have nothing to do with the EU, but you're working with Microsoft, and Microsoft's just requiring all of its vendors to be GDPR compliant. Well, then you're forced to do it.
Right.
And so you are seeing kind of a spread based on that alone. And then other regions certainly, politically and economically are looking at privacy a little bit different than they have in the past. So it is spreading.
So I imagine there's a lot of listeners out there going, what the hell's a GDPR? So do you want to give us a bit of a rundown as to what that was and why it was rolled out and how it was rolled out, where it was rolled out?
Sure. So the European Union is made up of 28 member states. The UK is leaving, but they said they're going to comply with the GDPR. And the European Union issues two things. Either issue a directive, which is essentially like a goal, and then each member state is supposed to pass a law supporting that goal and kind of falling in line with it. Or they have what's called regulation, and a regulation is immediately binding on all the member countries. And in the EU in 1995, they issued an directive that basically set forth how privacy and some of these other topics would be dealt with online. Well, if you think back to 1995 and the situation with the internet and the condition of the internet at that time compared to where it is now, obviously things have changed radically. So for 4 or 5 years, they tried to put together a new standard, and it was the GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulation. And it went into effect this past May 25th, 2018. And what it does is it looks at data protection and privacy from the perspective of how do we give people control of their data. It's very pro-individual and very anti-business. And so as a business, you have to have what's called a legal basis for collecting information from people. Mm-hmm. And you have to have a legal basis before you collect that information. Information is defined extremely broadly. It can be anything from an IP address to any information that directly or indirectly lets you identify that person, so long as they're located in the EU. And so then you get into these arguments about what are the different legal bases. One that's very common is consent. So you have to ask for consent. And you'll see on websites now as soon as you go to the website, you see like a little cookie pop up.
Right.
That's what these people are trying to do. They're trying to get consent before they start collecting information, because from a mechanical, technical point of view, when you go to a website, the servers almost always automatically collect the IP address.
Right.
And so does that violate the GDPR? And, a lot of people think that it does. So you're seeing this radical kind of reimagination of privacy, and to be honest, a lot of it is striking at the Googles and Facebooks of the world that, sweep up massive amounts of data, monetize it and sell it.
I mean, and that's one of the questions, I suppose, that I'd like to ask. Are they really interested in the smaller businesses? Someone who's got a PDF on their website that they can download and, it goes into like an email marketing program. I mean, we do that a lot over here. I mean, admittedly, a lot of our listeners out there are, contractors and, they have relatively small businesses. They're not really... I can't imagine that they'd be really in the eye of the law in regard to that. But what's your take on it?
That's a common view, and and I'll be honest. There's how many websites are there in the world?
Right.
huge amount. I think it's safe to say that, yeah, they are focused on the larger guys. However, the thing to understand about Europe is they have a completely different view of privacy than most other areas do. So in the States, for instance, we don't have privacy in our federal constitution. The court has interpreted it as a right, but the word privacy is never actually in there. In the EU, it's part of their charter.
Right.
And so they view it as a very powerful right. And in some cases, I always use the extreme country of France. In France, if you have a family, let's say, your wife's in Canada, she has family in Canada, and let's say you guys have kids, your kids are 8 and 10 years old, you have a birthday party, you take pictures, you post those pictures to Facebook so the family in Canada could see them. Well, in France, you just broken the law and you can go to jail. Yeah, you can go to jail for up to a year or be fined 5,000 people. Now, they're not hauling parents off to jail in France, but it is a law. And the reason being that you violated the privacy rights of your kids.
Right.
So that's the mentality that you're dealing with in these countries. It's just a different, some people think that's the way to go. Some people don't. But from a business perspective, it doesn't really matter. That's just the way it is. And so you see a lot of small people get hit with these things. Now you're going to read online that the penalties under the GDPR are up to $24 million or 4% of your worldwide gross. And that is true. But I think here's where your practical advice argument really comes more into play. Those penalties are obviously intended for the Facebooks and Googles of the world.
Right.
If you have a minor, problem with getting consent from somebody on your website or something of that sort, you're not going to get fined $24 million. That's just nonsense. It's scare tactics and everything else.
Yeah.
And typically, so I'll give you an example. The ICO is the enforcement agency in the UK. And last year, before the GDPR came out, they had their own similar type of law in the UK, and they could issue fines up to $500,000. There were something like 17,000 complaints submitted to them by citizens, there were 70,000 complaints. They opened cases in 17,000 situations, and they ended up issuing fines in something like 15 or 20 of the cases.
Right. Okay.
And they were more interested in getting those companies to get into compliance than they were in trying to generate penalties.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay.
Right. So now there are other jurisdictions, France and Germany. They're not as friendly, but and then there's the other side issue of kind of depends where you are. If you're in an area that it's going to be difficult for them to actually enforce any of this, that's certainly something to take into account.
Yeah, interesting. So I suppose from my understanding, the principles behind what they were trying to enforce with the GDPR, it kind of did sound a little bit like common sense. And I don't know if I'm off track there, but the idea of getting somebody's consent before you send them information to me sounds just like something you should do anyway. It's polite, right? What is your take, I suppose, on the reality of that sort of law being enforced in relation to, what's just really should be common courtesy?
Well, I think that, they're going to enforce it. I agree with you at first glance. Now, let me state my bias, of course, up front to make sure everybody will understand. I represent online businesses. I represent some online businesses that gather data that this law is really designed to defeat. So keep that in mind when I say the following. I think conceptually it's a good idea, and I think most people would agree that there needs to be some kind of a structure for dealing with data. I don't think the GDPR is a great approach because when you get into the practical reality of it, if you go to a website in Europe now, you have all these pop-ups. Mm-hmm. And those pop-ups quickly lose any value. It's kind of like the warning on your mattress. It's there.
Right.
Has anybody read it? Does anybody comply with it? What I would have preferred to see is more of kind of a structure, where they have some kind of a technological solution that people have to comply with. So I'll give you an example. Even before the GDPR, if you were in Europe, you would see cookie pop-ups all the time because there is what's called a cookie law in some of the member states. They've actually recognized that doesn't work.
Right.
And that people just ignore the thing and hit it and whatever just to get it off their page. And so they're coming out with a new email regulation, and they've actually gotten rid of that. Okay. And so it's like, okay, well, if you recognize that there, then why did you just put it back into the GDPR?
Right.
And so there's a lot of, and there's a lot of, the burden that they place on businesses is it's a little out of control, to be honest. So think about websites. Let's take a WordPress website, the most common platform out there. You build your WordPress site. How many plugins do you have? You use free tools from Google and all these different groups. Well, under the GDPR, you as the website controller, the person that owns that website, you are responsible for all of those parties and whether they comply with the GDPR.
Right.
and you're strictly liable, which
Okay.
means if they blow it, you're on the hook. And so you have to go out and get data protection agreements for each of these parties, which most people don't know. You see these GDPR compliance kits for $49 online, and they're just laughable. I mean, they don't address any of the issues that you have to comply with. So I think in the details of GDPR is not great. The overall concept of giving people control over their information, I think, yeah, that's probably good. The other thing that you see in Europe that's kind of problematic is that they don't differentiate between grandma's, how to grow tomatoes blog and Facebook.
Right.
There's no threshold there. So basically, the tomato blog has the same duty that Facebook has, and there's only one exception, which has to do with some record keeping, and that's it. Now, contrast that with the U.S. So California just passed this GDPR light law, and what California did, which I think is the better approach, is they said, okay, there are 3 thresholds, and if you meet any of the thresholds, then you have to comply with the law. The thresholds are 1, you have total sales of more than $25 million. 2, you have more than 50,000 visitors to your site a year. Or C, the third one is more than 50% of your revenue is derived from selling personal information. So if you think like people that are generating leads, that kind of a thing.
Right.
Now, to me, that's a better approach because you have all these small companies that are starting up, and it gives them a buffer before they have to start paying money to comply with these things.
Mm-hmm.
In the EU, you don't have that. And that's why when you look at the biggest internet businesses in the world, almost none of them are based in the EU.
Yeah, okay.
So
Interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, how do you see, I suppose, so that you said that's a Californian law at the moment, right? The California Privacy Act or something like that. Is that what you said?
yeah, the California Consumer Privacy Act, it was just enacted a couple of months ago.
And so that's obviously at a state level. That's being legislated by the California government. But then can you see that being rolled out across the United States, or will it be rolled out into other states? I mean, why California? Because Silicon Valley's located there, or?
California tends to be the state where most of these initiatives are passed. As you may have noticed, Washington, D.C. is just some word that I can say that isn't going to offend people. It's not like being done. Let's just put it that way.
Okay.
And so what's happened in the U.S. is you see California and states will issue a lot of these laws. Now, here's the trick about it, and something that causes some confusion. Although we say it's a California law, what California says is, if you're selling to anybody in California and you meet one of these thresholds, you have to comply.
Right.
So it doesn't matter where you are, and so it becomes a de facto national law in the U.S. Because we have something called sister state judgments. And what that means essentially is that one state will recognize the judgments and the penalties issued by another state.
Okay.
So it becomes effectively that. Now, if you're in another country, that's a whole different issue. And California really doesn't have a lot of sway. But I think that that's kind of what you're seeing overall with the internet, is you're seeing this kind of partitioning, and how do you deal with these situations?
Interesting. And so would it likely for that reason never roll out in other states? Like, would it be a case of, well, it doesn't matter, it's in California, so it's a sister state and that's good enough, or would it ever go broader?
No, other states will issue their own.
Okay. I'm sure.
And then it's complete pandemonium. And you try and figure out, where do you comply? Where do you not comply? In anticipation of this, what you're seeing in the U.S. right now is the big tech companies are coming out and are saying to Congress, pass something national.
Right.
Because otherwise we're going to be stuck looking at 50 different, it's just going to be a total nightmare. And so they're saying, pass something national. And of course, they put forth their own bill. And I know you're going to be shocked, but it has no penalty provisions. so if somebody violates it, there's no actual penalty. So that's, you can measure the value of that. But you are seeing that. You're seeing an effort in the U.S. to address this, because we went through a whole sales tax thing here with Amazon, and different states had different rules, and it was just a nightmare for small businesses.
Yeah, I'm curious to see whether or not it rolls out down here. I mean, we tend to be pretty relaxed with certain things, but I suppose when it comes to data protection and security, then the government, I suppose, effectively does have some sort of responsibility there to maintain that, for the benefit of the people, right?
Yeah, it depends on how privacy is really viewed. Here in the U.S., privacy law is kind of a joke. Our government swipes up huge amounts of information from us, and so does the commercial market, and people are they just kind of accept it. Yeah. What you're seeing with California is, it was really, in California, we have what's called an initiative process. And basically, if you have enough money, you can go out and if you get a certain number of signatures, you can get an initiative put on the ballot. And that was what happened here. You had a rich real estate developer in San Francisco, and a couple of his buddies decided they wanted this, to put something out, and they did. And it became apparent based on polling that it was going to pass. And so California just kind of, through political wrangling, went ahead and put the law in place because they needed to make some changes, and there were some technical issues there. But that's what you got in California.
Yeah.
As to whether the rest of the country or the rest of the world is interested in those things, I think it probably really just depends on your location.
We interrupt this podcast today to talk to you very quickly about Tradie Web Guy's content creation program. That program has been designed specifically for trade-based organizations as a way that you guys, as trade business owners, can start creating content that enables you to engage better with your customers and your potential customers. It will enable you to build trust and build rapport, because what you're doing is you're investing in educating them. Biggest problem that we see with our customers today is that they're not regularly updating their websites. And that's a problem because, first of all, the search engines are looking for that. And second of all, potential customers are also looking for it. Tradie Web Guy's content creation program has been specifically designed to help you get regular, relevant content on your website consistently every month. We know that it's hard when you're out there on the tools, and we know that sometimes you don't always have the time to be able to do these things yourself. So we're taking it off your hands for you. It's a service that we're offering for you guys. We want to make sure that you're getting this done because we know how important it is. Anyway, head across to tradiewebguys.com.au/content, fill in the form, and one of our representatives will come back to you. So aside from, I suppose, the GDPR and all the data protection, all that kind of stuff that's happening, locally, abroad, whatever, what are some of the other things that I suppose you would typically be focusing on as an in-house lawyer? Like, what are some of the common problems that you address or things that you see recurring with your customers or potential customers?
The business deals. A lot of my clients that they work with, they're online businesses, usually in joint efforts. And so putting together agreements on those issues, not only how's the business going to develop, but, how do you deal with, legal issues if you're going cross-border, which is almost always an issue online. You have to be careful with that. Copyright right now is kind of up in the air a little bit, not in the U.S. where we are, but, again, most of my clients are going to go cross-border. They're going to sell into the EU, and the EU is trying to issue new copyright rules, which are a bit odd. Again, the EU right now is just going through a period where they're focused on the internet, and they're issuing new directives that are going to change things. It's not as radical as the GDPR, but in the EU, they're having two kind of major changes. One is they're going to have a link tax. So if you link to any kind of news site, I'm not sure how they're going to define what's a credible news site and what's not. But if you link to any of that information or use any of it, you're going to have to pay a tax.
What?
Yeah.
So, oh wow, that's crazy. I mean, I could look at my own website and decipher that as a news site if I wanted to.
Right. Yeah. So you're going to get into all these issues. How do they even do it? It'll probably be switched more towards a licensing requirement or something of that sort. But basically what they're doing is, they're looking at the situation where, a lot of news agencies, are failing just because that economic model, the newspaper model and what have you, doesn't work well anymore. And so as a society, they're deciding that that's important. And this is how they're going to essentially fund those groups so that exists, and in the U.S., I mean, newspapers here, they're almost dust except for the big ones.
Yeah.
I don't know what's happening down by you, but probably something similar. So how do you deal with that issue? Because obviously you need investigative reporters. As much as people don't like the media, it's important to have those people keep an eye on some of the shenanigans that are going on, particularly in political circles. The second thing that the EU is doing is they're moving away from kind of the DMCA concept of a safe harbor for websites, and they're saying that websites that process quote unquote large amounts of information, I don't know what that is, are going to have to filter it for copyright infringement.
Right.
So, it's called the meme killer law. Basically, Facebook's and these groups, they're not going to be able to say, well, the users are doing it, we didn't do it, so we're not liable. In the EU, now they're going to be liable. And so what that means is that they're going to clamp down on data. They're going to clamp down on what people are uploading, user-generated content. And, you've seen YouTube trying to do it for the last, however many years with their content ID system. And sometimes it works well, and sometimes it doesn't. But you're going to see more of that coming through. And so then questions are, how do you address that? How do you, build content that's not going to get flagged? And with my clients, I can tell you that the recommendation is everything original. Don't use anything from anybody else.
Right.
And that can be costly at times, but it also adds to your credibility. People know.
Absolutely.
They know when they're looking at stock and that kind of thing, and who cares about that stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you can go original, absolutely go original, because the licensing scenario online right now is kind of up in the air.
Yeah, and so that's a big thing that we've been implementing the last 18 months, 2 years with my company. Obviously, we build websites and that kind of stuff, but then it's often it could take months and months and months to get clients to actually give you relevant images and content. So we try and help them with that process, and we've got copywriters and all that kind of stuff. But like my advice is always, look, guys, take this as a place filler and just make it your own, and amend it and tweak it and do whatever you can to change it as much as possible to make it suit your business. And especially things like photos and images, right? Like images, like you say, you can see a stock image a mile off.
No, absolutely. And I think the thing with original content that a lot of people don't understand, even with larger businesses, is that you don't have traditional PR will tell you you never apologize. You always have to be touting your accomplishments. And I just don't think that's the case anymore. I think people are much more receptive to a business or an individual, depending on what it is, who shows both sides of the game.
Yeah.
And you'll see people that are out there. They'll say, well, I tried this business idea and it didn't work, and here's exactly why, and here's why I think I made a mistake. Well, that's much more credible.
Right.
If they then have a subsequent, course or something that they offer where it does work.
Right.
Because in that situation, you've seen both sides of it. And I don't know about you, but certainly not everything I've done in my life has been, raging success. I believe that's called living.
Yeah. But hey, Richard, you've made it now, mate. You're on the Site Shed podcast. So that's that's the pinnacle.
Yeah, so I'm flipping screens looking at Ferraris right now. So, but I do think with the original content, and particularly with larger companies, the ability to laugh at yourself and have things out there that are real instead of all the nonsense that you see. All the pro forma statements and what have you. I always love the athlete apologies where you've listened to this person talk and then you read the apology and there's just no way in hell that person wrote that apology.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So original content. I think that's really just should be your focus.
So I'm curious with all of these laws and as you just said, link taxes and all this kind of stuff coming out. Is there going to be a push towards, places like the dark web and, people taking their business to a less legislated, less policed sort of environment?
Yes.
Yep.
Absolutely. The dark web is, obviously has all the connotations of nefarious things. But to be honest, there's a lot of stuff on there that, isn't particularly interesting. But it's there because people don't want to deal with that or don't want to deal with, certain licensing issues, things of that sort. So I'll give you an example. You go on the dark web. There's a group here. I just forgot their name. They make farming equipment, a huge company, but you can also buy it for your house, like lawnmowers and things of that sort. Anyways, they are taking the view that you cannot change anything on their equipment because it's a violation of their copyright. So if you change the software or something of that sort, or you try and fix the vehicle on your own, you're essentially violating their copyright. Okay. Strange as it sounds, a lot of courts believe that is the case.
Okay.
Well, so you go onto the dark web and there are sites that have all of their manuals,
right,
all the instructions on how to fix it.
Yeah.
That you can't publish on the web itself because, you'd be getting a cease and desist letter within, a couple of minutes. And so you are seeing that. And I think, the dark web, you're going to see even more. But the thing with the dark web is you always have to be careful because, a lot of the accepted strategies for getting on there and the idea that you have anonymity, you have to be really careful with that. Yeah. If you're just using Tor, that's not going to do it.
Okay.
So people really need to know what they're doing when they get onto there. And then
we should probably explain to the listeners actually what the dark web is, because admittedly I've been working in the digital space for a long time, and it was only maybe 6 months ago I heard an interesting podcast, and off the back of it I went and read a book called American Kingpin, which was about the founder of Silk Road.
Mm-hmm.
And
Dread Pirate Roberts.
Yeah.
Dread Roberts.
Yeah, exactly. And it actually, I was thinking, how did I live under a rock for so long when I'm in the digital space? Like, what is going on here? So since then, I've been doing a bit of research, and it's pretty amazing stuff. Do you want to maybe just give the listeners a bit of a rundown as to what it is?
Sure. So the internet is actually broken up into different components. The internet was originally developed by the U.S. government, believe it or not. Large sections of it were at least made viable.
Would Switzerland agree with that comment?
I'm sorry?
Would Switzerland agree with that comment? I heard it was there's a bit of contention there as to who came up with it.
There's all kinds of contention, but for the purpose of this, the important thing to understand is that there's when you talk the dark web, literally everything is contested. But there is a section of it that was developed purely for communications that would be anonymous and what have you. And so if you go to you go to Google or whatever, and you can do searches, you can't find anything on the dark web. You need a particular search engine to do it. And you get into these areas. But basically what it is an area that isn't open to the public. You have to access it through certain methods. You have to almost know what some of the websites are. They're not listed by domain names. Typically, instead they're listed usually by numbers, although now you're seeing more of the names. And the idea is that you're anonymous there, and that it's true capitalism. It's true free society. Everybody talks about, I want a free society. I want all these things. Well, there's some pretty damn ugly things about free society. So you have sites that deal in child porn, sites where you can buy drugs. Silk Road, the site you're talking about, was famous. They made billions of dollars. Well, maybe not billions, but hundreds of millions of dollars. And it was primarily drugs that were being sold. And the kingpin was the guy that originally started it. And he got popped and he got life in jail. But there are other sites up there that deal with everything from getting software to getting courses, copyright infringement type of materials, but also people that communicate from countries where maybe the political climate is such that they can't openly speak on the web, and those kinds of things. So there's good and bad to it. Right. Typically you get into it through using what's called an Onion or Tor browser, and you go in, and what happens is when you upload that, you also want to get a VPN, a virtual private network, and you access that, and it sends you through a bunch of different computers. It's very hard to track. However, it's not impossible, right? And there are ways it can be tracked. So be very careful if you're thinking of doing something. Well, I get calls every once in a while from people who purchase drugs on the dark web. Right. And then the drug dealer gets popped, and, they have a list of the people that they sent their product off to. Right. And people don't seem to think about that. That person's probably keeping your name and address. And then for the police, it's rather easy just to, it's going right down the list. Yeah. So you see a lot of that. But anyways, once you get onto the dark web, you have access to information that's really unedited, unfettered, unfiltered. Yeah. So you see Google and all these groups, they're going after extremist groups and this, that, and the other. Well, those sites, particularly the sites that, that disappear from the web, like Alex Jones, I think right now is, having a bad time of it. He'll probably end up on the dark web, or some variation of his site. Some of these groups. So it's for better or for worse, but it's out there. But be very careful when you go on there. There are tons of scams. Yeah. And they view you. The environment is such that, if you're an idiot, then you deserve to have your information and your identity stolen. Yeah. So you need to know what you're doing, read books like you're talking about, before you get on there, because otherwise, they'll do, and a lot of it's just kind of funny stuff. I mean, there was one program, they were doing a mirror program, and people would panic because they would get off of it and they would say, oh my God, all my computer's been hacked. I'm looking at my computer, I'm on Google, and I can see all my records and everything. And none of that information was actually out there. It was just a mirror program showing them their hard drive. Right. So nobody else could see it, but, it's pure panic and, so there's a lot of that kind of stuff. But, it's an interesting area. And I think more people and more businesses will be going there. They already are, to be honest. Yeah, because I read somewhere that a lot of the bigger businesses are actually, because the dark web is becoming more and more popular, they're setting up, duplicate sites on the dark web as well, just for the purpose of traffic. Is that accurate? I haven't seen like a major move for it, but there's some companies out there. The other thing is, the currency. Bitcoin and all these different groups. To be honest, you can go onto the dark web, and if it becomes more of a accepted commercial medium, it's hard to see governments not trying to crack down, because at that point they lose control of tracking and tax. I don't know where you've gone, and they, exactly. No, it sounds mundane, but that's exactly it. Yeah. If you start getting taxed right and left online, there was a point I was watching an old Rolling Stones documentary. I don't know when it was, 70s or something like that. There was a point where the highest earning individuals in the UK were paying 90% income tax. What? Yeah, and so they had left, and they were living in France just to get away from it.
Wow.
And if you see some kind of a result of that sort online, you're going to see people go to the dark web. I'll give you one area that's kind of a concern for a lot of us legal nerds, and not get into it too much, but ICANN controls a lot of the domain infrastructure in the world. ICANN was actually, it's a nonprofit, it's based in California, but it was kind of residually controlled by the Department of, I think it's Commerce or Energy, I'm not even sure, in the U.S. They didn't really do anything, but they passed the budget for it. Well, that went to international ownership this past year. And so, everybody, utopia, that's great and everything. But the problem is, what if you get a majority of interested parties in that have different views on things like free speech? So what if China and Russia become the principal controllers for a period of time? Okay, well, those countries, if you criticize the president, you tend to visit the Gray Motel for a number of years. And so what effect does that have on websites? What effect does that have on the internet? Nobody really knows. I mean, maybe it has no effect. Maybe it has a lot. It's just hard to say.
So I suppose before we wrap up, is there any advice that you'd be able to give, or is there any sort of frameworks or anything, for the listeners out there that I suppose could help them with, with respect to your company, not ending up speaking on internet lawyers, how to stay safe and how to sort of keep their head above water and do everything correctly?
The two things that I would tell people right now is, one, we've already discussed, original content.
Yeah.
If you are creating your own content and you're bringing value to people with that, most of the issues that you're going to face online, the very common ones with copyright infringement, and that's the most common one. Mm-hmm. The issues you're going to face there are, you going after somebody, not somebody coming after you.
Yeah.
And so that's really, I can't emphasize that enough. And the second thing is to think about your market and to recognize that there's a pretty good likelihood in the next 10 years, the internet is going to be divided up geographically by, into economic unions, into economic areas, much like we see in the real world. So the EU, NAFTA, which you see in North America, in the Asian groups and all of that, and really think about, okay, well, here's my target market. How am I going to, deal with these issues and with these laws coming up? And does it make sense? So I have clients in the US, for instance, maybe they have 10 sales a year to the EU.
Right.
Well, should they spend 15 or 20 grand complying with the GDPR, or should they just block the traffic?
Right.
And it's, and people get outraged and they say it's the internet, it's worldwide, and that's great and all, but it's also cash return on investment. Mm-hmm. And are you making that kind of money? And, unfortunately, I think that's where you're going to see it go. And in fact, when the GDPR went into effect, as many people know, a lot of newspapers in the U.S. Just blocked the EU.
Yeah,
and they blocked them because they were making money off passive ads that was very hard to comply with under the GDPR law. But so did big retailers. There's a big sports retailer called Dick's Sporting Goods in the U.S., and they blocked the EU. Wow. So I think you're going to see more of that kind of a situation. The irony of it all is that with a law like the GDPR, they're really trying to, go after Facebook and Google, and those are really the only companies that have the funds and the resources to comply with all of this stuff. So I'm not sure it reaches the goal that they're after. But it's interesting times. It's definitely interesting times. And, if you'd told me that the internet was going to change based on privacy of all things, I would have been pretty shocked. But that's what's happening.
Yeah, no kidding. And I suppose just in closing, who effectively governs these legislations? I mean, obviously the EU, but who is the EU? Is it who is monitoring all this stuff, and who do you report this stuff to, and where does it all come from?
Well, that's a huge debate in Europe.
Yeah.
The EU is, made up of representatives that come from each of the member states. However, there's a huge bureaucracy, and there's a lot of anger and dissatisfaction about how much each of the member states really have an effect on the ultimate policies, and that's what Brexit basically was. And you see it with other countries, Italy. There are other countries, even Sweden, that are considering getting out of the EU because have they really given away their ability to legislate themselves? Because if you look at Europe, there's a lot of different attitudes. The attitudes between Northern Europe and Southern Europe are radically different.
Yeah.
And so how do you is everybody being served as they should be? As far as actually enforcement of what they do is they say, well, okay, we're passing this regulation. The EU doesn't actually enforce it. What they do is they just empower each of the countries to go ahead and do it. Mm-hmm. And so you get into these hilarious battles. So much of the EU is very anti-US as an economic basis. It's just a natural conflict. However, Ireland got the smart idea of, okay, well, if all you guys are going to make it difficult for the US, we'll make it easy. And so suddenly, they had this low tax basis and everything else for U.S. tech companies. And so in Ireland, you see this huge influx of U.S. tech companies hiring locals and everything. And it was a great deal. And so the EU actually came in, I think it was last year, maybe the year before, and went after Apple and said, "You owe us something like $15 billion in taxes."
What?
That you should have paid. And Apple's response was, no. Ireland gave us this provision. They're part of the EU. We paid what we were supposed to pay. We just paid it through Ireland. Mm-hmm. And Ireland said, yes, that's exactly right. And so you ended up with the EU suing Ireland countersuing the EU. And Apple's just sitting there going, hey, this isn't anything to do with us. So,
I was wondering why all of the support stuff for Google were coming out of Ireland. Every time I'd call up, there'd be someone from Ireland on there. I'd be like, oh, hello.
Oh, well, no. The funny thing, so in like France, the enforcement agency, which has gone after Google, is basically what they do. The joke is, the enforcement agency there takes up about 4 blocks of downtown Paris and employs about 100,000 people. The enforcement agency in Ireland is 3 guys named O'Hare who sit down at the pub all day. And, because you're exactly right. And it's all to Ireland's credit.
Yeah.
The economic benefit that they received from doing that, it was just massive.
Right.
And so are they ever really going to, get aggressive about going after U.S. companies? No.
Which, to be fair, they needed because they got hit pretty hard in the global recession. So they were probably looking at any way to climb back, which apparently they've done.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is very fascinating when you start reading about, the details of all these different groups and the different interests that are involved and how they manifest.
Sneaky Irish.
Yep.
All right. Well, Richard, I want to thank you for your time. This has been very informative. Your website is SoCal Internet Lawyers. That's SOCAL internetlawyer.com. People can reach you there. You're on LinkedIn. And did you want to leave an email if anyone wants to ask you anything, Richard, or do you just want to go through the website?
Just come. You can get me through the website and get all the emails directly, or catch me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, so you can head across the website. You can fill in the contact form there, and you can get hit with loads of ebooks and regular mailing lists, of course.
No consent. No consent.
Exactly. All right, mate. That's fantastic. Thank you very much. For listeners, if you have any questions about anything that you've heard today, of course, you can visit the show notes. You can leave some comments there. If you are part of the Facebook community, you can head across there. You can ask questions, and if you need anything followed up on, I will certainly gladly do that. Ask Richard to come back on the show, and we can ask those questions for you. Richard, thank you very much for your time, and that pretty much wraps this up. So again, we really appreciate you investing in our community.
Great. Well, thank you for having me on.
Rock and roll. Thank you for listening to another episode of Toolbox Talks. If you're liking what you hear, then you can head across to thesiteshed.com where you can join our community by signing up to our Toolbox Talks. You'll get sent a weekly notification, which is basically a highlight of everything that we've spoken about during that week, along with any other industry news that may be relevant or specific to the trades. If you're enjoying the show, you can head across to iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, where you can leave us a review. That would be fantastic, and all the reviews get read out in the show. Likewise, if you have any friends or colleagues that you think would benefit from the show and the episodes that we create, then please go ahead and share it with them.